I'm here today to talk about issues related to international comparative studies of Catholic schools. As you can see, the International Handbook of Catholic Education, just published last week by Kluwer Academic Press, is a compendium of research pieces that talk about the state of Catholic schools worldwide. This has come about because Gerald Grace and I, became convinced that there are far too few international comparative studies, and that when we look especially at the Catholic Church, which is arguably the largest multicultural organization within the world, during an era of globalization, sadly what we found is there are very few studies that build a, if you will, a research field of Catholic education. And so we decided that this gap needed to be filled. We decided that because of the importance of faith-based schools around the world, the increasing importance of religious issues, and then also the increasing internationalization of schooling and of research. Let me talk a little bit about the volume itself. As you can see, it is a lengthy 2-volume work intended as a reference work primarily in a series of international handbooks about issues related to education. You can see by the slide that there are a number of different countries around the world that are represented. 34 countries in the 45 chapters and 906 pages. In this voluminous work, what we try to discover are the key challenges that Catholic schools face, especially as they attempt to hand on the faith. And that is an ongoing theme of the Church in the 21st Century initiative here at Boston College. So what we're doing today is looking at that question of handing on the Catholic faith and seeing it from a global perspective, 35 nations around the world, how those involved in Catholic schools confront the challenges of handing on the faith from one generation to another. Now, I'd ask you to take a look at this quote, and let me read it for you. "Our time is one of religious decline. The once enduring vitality of religion is in decay. The masses have become either suspicious or gullible or even indifferent to religion. Society's elites are agnostic or skeptical, and its political leaders are hypocrites. Youth are in open conflict with established society and with the authorities of the past. They experiment with Eastern religions and techniques of meditation. The greater part of mankind is affected by the decay of the times." Now, I want to ask you just to take a moment and think about who conceivably is the author of this statement. Well, of course, you might be thinking it's educational philosophers or clerics, political commentators in our contemporary scene. In fact, it's from Tacitus, the Roman historian, the beginning of the 1st century. My point is this, that handing on faith from one generation to another and the challenges to handing on faith are not unique to our time. This is a human phenomenon that has existed in every culture and in every age. But the question for us is to try to understand what are the particular challenges that we face in our era. Are things better or not? Is the situation more challenging now to hand on faith and traditions than it was at the time of Tacitus? So, albeit recognizing the challenges of situating one's own place in history, nonetheless, I do think we can look at what I call some paradigm shifts that are both by themselves and also by the combination unique to our era at the beginning of the 21st century. Now, there's been much talk, of course, of paradigm shifts and trying to see oneself. And as you can see with this cartoon, I'm afraid you've had a paradigm shift. In fact, I think we need to look at some of the shifts that would come about that are evident in the research that we've done and the pieces that we have collected. So I want to talk about 5 different paradigm shifts. Now, these by no means are exhaustive, but I think raise important questions for consideration and also give you a sense of the flavor of the book, the two-volume book. First is the reality of secularization. Secondly, globalization. Third, issues related to student culture. Fourth, the role of women in the church. And then fifth, the whole area of accessibility. Secularization. Now, certainly secularization, which is consigning religion to the margins of human concern, is something that is not new. In fact, one of our contributors from the Catholic University of Uruguay speaks about the long-standing anti-clericalism from the foundation of that in many Latin countries. But what she talks about now is a resurgent secularization that's happening within her culture and with others. Certainly in our own nation. And if you look at the example that I have on the slide of some recent publications of the resurgence of a skepticism about belief in God, or if not a skepticism, certainly a reality that makes God quite irrelevant to the major concerns of people. An enormous challenge for a network of schools that have as their primary purpose and value the handing on of faith. Another of our contributors, James Conroy, who's Dean of the School of Education at Glasgow University, illustrates much of the popular opinion that comes about, especially when government tries to be supportive of these efforts to hand on faith. And he quotes a political commentator named Muriel Gray, and she's writing in the Sunday Herald in Scotland, sort of the equivalent of the New York Times, if you will, an op-ed piece in the Times. And she writes this: "For the government of a secular country such as ours to treat religion as if it had real merit, instead of regarding it as a ridiculous anachronism which education, wisdom, and experience can hopefully overcome in time, is one of the most depressing developments of the 21st century. Religion as a ridiculous anachronism that education can hopefully overcome." This presents an enormous challenge to Catholic educators throughout the world. Now, globalization is connected to this phenomenon of secularization, another facet of the challenges that Catholic educators face. And as you can see in the slide, I'm using the cover of a book written by Juliet Schor, who is the chair of our sociology department here at Boston College, where she studies how marketers target children as consumers of their products from a very, very early age. And while there's nothing wrong with the marketplace, but certainly in such a media-saturated culture, children begin to see their own self-worth and their value not in their own personhood, but rather in their ability to consume products, to wear certain brand names. One of our commentators from the Catholic University of Lublin in Poland writes quite compellingly about the emergence of Catholic education in that country, emerging now from communism and from a socialist centralization to a market economy which on the one hand allows the freedom for religious communities to exercise their faith, but presents a new set of challenges, especially related to this globalization, to, if you will, this commercialization of culture. And he writes about the domination in Poland now, the self-defining of humans as those who have, not those who are. In other words, it is all about to have rather than to be. And I think we all see that in our own cultural context. Now, in a very different part of the world, in South Africa, Mark Potterton, who directs the Catholic Education Institution in South Africa, wrote in our work about the schools, Catholic schools in Lesotho. And he's talking about the increasing encroachment of globalized capitalism in that part of the world, and how that forms a new challenge for Catholic educators. He writes this: "During apartheid times, Catholic schools were seen by many as beacons of hope in a country that was polarized by racially based legislation and practices. Today, rampant marketization threatens the identity of wealthier schools, and Catholic schools are once again being called to be countercultural, to become witnesses, beacons of hope, witnesses to another reality." So certainly one of the great challenges we find across the world is the challenge that is presented by our highly commercialized, globalized, capitalist culture that devalues so many of the most sacred tenets of our faith, of the worth of human beings, who one is, not what one has. Student culture, obviously, is related to this too. And we see in student culture, in a very highly technologically sophisticated world, where modes of communication, where the very foundations of language, with the way people relate to one another, is changing dramatically. Now, I myself own an iPhone, so I am not a Luddite, and I am not trying to discount the positive values of technology. But I think we need to look carefully at the ways that these technological communications advances challenge traditional notions of faith. Angelina Gutierrez from St. Scholastica College in the Philippines writes about the global economy and the advent of things like telecommunications devices and how that is changing the way people relate to one another. She wrote, "The global market economy and telecommunications have not spared young people. The widespread craze of communicating by mobile phone has led to text gambling as well as cell phone sex, even among the young. Shopaholic parents and kids waste time and money at the malls satisfying their consumerist appetites. Even something like multitasking and the various rapid dimensions of life mitigate against the kind of thoughtfulness, the kind of focus, the kind of careful consideration that are the bedrock of entering into a communication with God." Take a look at the following film clip that I think illustrates well the world as young people see it today. Of course, the challenge that Panasonic is talking about has to do with integrating technology into instruction and obviously selling their own products. And I would certainly concur at how important that is. That the challenge that Catholic schools face is to enter into the world of youth, to enter into their modes of communication, to enter into the way they relate to one another, but to do so in a way that leads them to something different. Leads them away from a multitasking, leads them away from a kind of superficiality that clearly inhibits a person from probing the deeper problems, realities of life, and the opening to religious experience. So schools can provide a kind of spiritual foundation, but the problem is, if that is done in isolation from the rest of a young person's world, how effective indeed can it be? And if those experiences of spirituality are irrelevant, first of all, or even if they are for a moment, how long-lasting are they? So the challenge becomes connecting the religious formation that happens in a school experience with the broader world. Father David Toohey, our contributor from Ireland, from the University of Galway, wrote this: "There is a danger that the Catholic school becomes an isolated, self-referring religious experience where young people develop a taste for the spiritual. If there is no follow-up outside the school, then it will be difficult for young people to sustain that spirituality in the transition to third-level studies or to the world of work. They then begin to think of their school experience as a nostalgic factor of childhood that they have outgrown." So how do schools enter into the world of young people in a long-lasting way that permeates both in-school and out-of-school experiences? How, for example, to work with families and parents to enhance the work of the school in handing on the faith to the next generation? Another aspect that we found in a number of pieces contributed across the 34 countries is the important role of women within the church. And a recognition that this is both an issue that is quite complex, given the patriarchal nature of the Roman Catholic Church, given the prohibition of ordination to women, given a traditional societal perspective that is heavily patriarchal and heavily traditional, where women's role was subsidiary to men, was to be in the home, was not to be an active leader and participant in social and cultural life. And yet within that framework, we found that Catholic schools have remarkably advanced the role and perspective of women in some very significant ways. For example, our contributor, who is and calls herself a feminist sociologist from the University of Malta, talks about the Catholic education experience there. Now, Malta is a very traditional, overwhelmingly Catholic society, a traditional patriarchal society. But she talks about the ways that Catholic schools for girls has provided a different perspective on the role of women in society. The number of women who have entered professional life at the highest level of their professions, because they were taught in the Catholic school their own worth and their ability to be self-determining and not to be, certainly to be engaged in family life and certainly to uphold family values, but also to see themselves as, and the word she uses, empowered and liberated from past patterns of social roles to take on important leadership roles. So certainly the liberating role of Catholic education for women. Cardinal Topo, who's the Archbishop of Ranchi and the Secretary of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of India, talks about the role of Catholic education there, where the importance traditionally in India in Catholic schools that have been attached to women's education has been one of the major elements, he says, that have led to the enlightenment of Indian women of all religion, castes, and regions. In India, Catholic women religious had access to women and were able to pioneer new models and new levels of education, similar to Malta, to be women being able to see themselves in positions of leadership in society, and that really being fostered through their experience of Catholic schools. Now, throughout the world, and especially, I think, in our own society, one of the key challenges that Catholic schools face is accessibility. And by this, I mean that Catholic schools in many countries of the world, not all, but in many countries are not supported by government and therefore have to be self-supporting. And while philanthropy plays a role, and of course it has to play an increasingly important role, many Catholic schools are dependent heavily, if not solely, upon tuition, which means that families have to have a certain level of income to be able to have access to a Catholic education. Now, certainly in, again, a situation around the world that raises a great challenge when we look at the eliting of students in Catholic schools. And data have shown, my own studies looking at Catholic elementary schools, other studies in the United States looking at Catholic secondary schools, and finding that parallel to the Catholic population at large, the increasing levels of wealth and the decreasing presence of people from lower income backgrounds. Now, on the one hand, I suppose if we simply let the market determine who comes to Catholic schools, that's not a problem. But given our mission and given the understanding of our faith, the faith that we are trying to hand on to the next generation, it is a very serious challenge to Catholic schools. As you can see on the slide, I have the picture of North and South America, and accompanying it, a text that was given by Pope John Paul II in his address Ecclesia in America in 1999, in which he addressed Catholics in North and South America to see themselves in a more global perspective across the boundaries of language, culture, and nationhood. And in all sectors, in Latin America and in North America, and as we found, reflected in the other nations around the world, is this challenge to mission. Pope John Paul II said this: "It is essential that every possible effort be made to ensure that Catholic schools, despite financial difficulties, continue to provide a Catholic education to the poor and the marginalized in society. It will never be possible to free the needy from their poverty unless they are first freed from the imprisonment arising from the lack of an adequate education." The work of the Church educating people, immigrants, newcomers, people from poorly educated families, people from lower income families, people from non-dominant cultures, has been a marvelous part of the legacy, certainly of Catholic schools in the United States. It is the legacy of Boston College, founded to provide opportunities for immigrants who came here in the mid-19th century, who suffered discrimination because of their ethnicity and because of their religion. And if we lose that, if our schools become gated communities, enclaves only for the wealthy and the privileged, we not only lose the opportunity to serve greater society by providing young people, deserving young people from underserved communities with the important and vital education that they need to move ahead, but also we are losing touch and foregoing the opportunity to hand on the faith to the masses, to the large number of people. And certainly this is an issue that we struggle with here in the U.S. It is also an issue that is quite prominent in Latin America and in other parts of the world. For example, our authors, joint authors in the piece from Argentina, both professors at the Pontifical Catholic University in Buenos Aires, talk about the challenge to evangelize the lower social strata of society through Catholic education, as well as the middle class and the upper class. So certainly that challenge of accessibility is crucial. And again, if it weren't for the fundamental mission, which is handing on the faith to the next generation, we could simply allow this eliting of our Catholic schools, Catholic colleges, and Catholic universities to go forward. But clearly it is unacceptable given our mission and given where we are in the beginning of the 21st century and given our hopes to continue to pass on the faith. So the International Handbook, I think, is the beginning, really the first time that we have taken this worldwide perspective on the challenges that Catholic educators face. And of course we know that looking at familiar realities and other cultural and social contexts is the breeding ground for creativity, for new answers, for new perspectives, and how important that is. We also are readying a third volume that will focus on Catholic higher education with a similar worldwide global representation, so that these issues that we face handing on the faith in Catholic elementary and secondary education, we will be able to get a much richer picture of the challenges of handing on the faith in higher education institutions. It's also, I think, important that when we look at these issues and these challenges, that we take advantage of the social sciences, that we take advantage of research, that we look at empirical reality. And so this book is not so much philosophical and theological in nature, even though philosophical and theological reflection permeates the pieces, but it really is looking at what empirical studies do we have to inform us as we face the daunting challenges of the 21st century in our efforts to hand on the faith to the next generation. Thank you.
Catholic school leaders need to have spiritual and religious literacy, meaning a knowledge and capacity to talk about the faith in informed, articulate, and personally committed ways. Because in England we feel this is such a crucial issue, my centre in London has just issued a small publication which we send out to the Catholic schools of England, just a 7,000-word publication for their staff development. We have just published and sent out Theological Literacy and Catholic Schools, with an encouragement that all schools shall do in-service development around the concept theological literacy and how it should be developed in Catholic schooling. Because, you know, we have to remember that the educational power of the religious in the past was that they represented the faith made manifest in a classroom in a dramatic and visible way. They were a sort of incarnation of the faith, and this daily incarnation of the faith had powerful effects upon the young. I'm sure there are people in this audience who would witness to that. At the same time, by virtue of their own faith formation, they were possessed of the theological and faith resources to explain the faith to the young with clarity and authority. When Anthony Brake and his colleagues at the University of Chicago sought to explain the effectiveness of Catholic high schools, the Catholic high schools which they studied, they did so partly by referring to the inspirational ideology of these schools. This inspirational ideology was a major factor in constituting the distinctive educational and social ethos of these schools, making them a different sort of educational environment to that of the local public school. This inspirational ethos was generated by the faith commitments of Catholic teachers and principals. It is this inspirational ethos which has to be preserved and renewed if the faith is to be handed on to the present generation of students. The role of religious congregations and of Catholic universities and colleges in renewing this inspirational ethos is absolutely crucial at this time, as the contributors to this handbook demonstrate. And the third theme is the importance of preserving and extending the mission of Catholic schools. In a chapter I wrote for the Second International Handbook of Educational Leadership, a chapter called Mission Integrity, Contemporary Challenges for Catholic School Leaders, By the way, I had great difficulty persuading the editors of this volume that anyone would be interested in such a chapter. When they wrote to me and said, oh, we're going to do the second handbook of educational leadership. Gerald, you've written in the field of educational leadership. Would you like to offer a chapter? And I said, certainly. I'll do mission integrity, contemporary challenges. They said, what? Catholic school leaders? They said, we've never dealt with this before. I said, well, it's time you did. And I'm ready to write the chapter. And indeed, it got published. And actually, as I said in the beginning, it was when I received that, and the difficulty I had in even getting one chapter that looked to Catholic school leaders in an international handbook on educational leadership, that I thought, we need this. We need to come out of the closet, if you like, and put Catholic education in mainstream educational research, not at its margins. Now, mission integrity means that an organization and the people within it can be seen to be living and practicing the principles of the mission statement and not simply publishing them in a prospectus or in other publicity statements as an exercise in marketing. And the chief guardian of mission integrity is the school principal, which is why school principals are leaders first, or should be, and managers second. To have a concept of mission integrity, you must, of course, have a clear concept and understanding of the contemporary mission of Catholic schools as proclaimed by the Church. What I have called the founding charter of post-Vatican II Catholic schooling was proclaimed very clearly by the Sacred Congregation for Catholic Education in the 1977 publication, The Catholic School. I never tire of taking this quote round England, Ireland, the world, because it is so fundamental. Here it is. First and foremost, the Church offers its educational service to the poor, or those who are deprived of family help and affection, and this is very radical, this one, and its full implications, I think, haven't been properly understood yet, or those who are far from the faith. Since education is an important means of improving the social and economic condition of the individual and of peoples, if the Catholic school were to turn its attention exclusively or predominantly to those of the wealthier social classes, it could be contributing towards maintaining their privileged position and could thereby continue to favor a society which is unjust. I would love to know who wrote those words. They are most inspirational. Now, Joseph O'Keefe here in the USA is one of the Catholic world's leading researchers in documenting that we are beginning to lose that authentic mission to the poor. As across the world, as these volumes demonstrate, but most dramatically in the USA, the Church finds itself compelled to close down Catholic schools which have been in the service of the poor and the powerless. As he expresses it most evocatively, and sometimes, let me say, American English has a quality of pithiness and getting to the point that English never gets to. I love this expression he has because it says so much in such a short space. The English could never come up with this formula. In his chapter in this volume, in the title, No Margin, No Mission. What a powerful statement, so shortly and pithily expressed. No margin, no mission. Now, what does this mean? It means that we are losing our mission integrity in relation to the mission to the poor. If these developments continue unabashed and unchecked across the world, Catholic schools will be handing on the faith and the opportunities for personal realization of talent and improve life chances, not first and foremost to the poor, but first and foremost to the wealthier social classes. This will be a realization of that most troubling statement in St. Matthew's Gospel. Unto him that hath, it shall be given, and to him that hath not, it shall be taken away, even that little that he hath. Now, if you can work your way through all the haths, you will see it's a very stark statement. And I tell you, it's a stark statement of where we are headed unless some change in our policy takes place. Because then we have to ask ourselves the question in contemporary Catholic education, to whom are we attempting to hand on the faith in contemporary conditions? We may be handing on to those who already have, and that will not be our authentic mission. So I would say that what can be derived again from the analyses of our contributors is that the Church and Catholic educators across the world must become, another phrase I've learned from Joe O'Keefe, must become more politically savvy and more politically active in the cause of preserving the mission of Catholic schools to be really first and foremost in the service of the poor when it comes to handing on the faith. Government and states across the world know perfectly well that Catholic schools in their jurisdictions contribute massively to the formation of good citizens and massively to the common good of their societies. It is time for these governments and these states to recognize that contribution and to make significant financial grants available to those schools, especially when they are operating in poor and deprived communities. When Christ sent out his disciples to teach to a fallen world, he advised them to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. It is time for the Church and Catholic educators to show something of that political wisdom in the cause of preserving and extending the mission of handing on the faith to the poorest and to the most powerless communities of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Professor Grace, and now we'll invite Karen to the podium for a response to those words.
Thank you very much. Joe and Gerald asked me to talk a little bit about this from our perspective in the United States. So I want to make a few general statements that are kind of applicable to the several categories delineated by Joe and by Gerald, and then a few issues that I think are pressing directly to the Catholic schools in the United States at this time. The National Catholic Education Association serves approximately 200,000 members who do the work of the educational ministries of the Church, from elementary and secondary schools to parish religious education programs, central offices, boards of governors, seminaries, and colleges and university. It is our goal as the central voice of Catholic education to provide service, direction, and leadership to these members. So you might surmise we are deeply and broadly involved in Catholic education, and so my remarks kind of come from that viewpoint. You know that when the school doors open, when students pass through the classroom door, at whatever level of schooling, societal issues accompany them. I once heard a person say, yes, schools have drug problems, but if we assembled 500 high school students and took them to McDonald's, We could say McDonald's has a drug problem. The challenges of secularization, the consumer culture, materialism, family dysfunction, and so on are present then in all educational enterprises. We continue to struggle around time priorities, soccer practice versus Sunday Mass, the common good or the individual, the constant pressure to shop and shop and shop some more, to say nothing of the media that has even pointed out the Pope's Gucci shoes. All of those things are present, they're all influential, and they all need to be brought forth for critique. So the question is whether the faith-filled school can provide an antidote to the strong influences, those influences which often are not life-giving, that are promoted in society. It is in this sense that the Catholic education hopes to provide what is countercultural. The challenge and the opportunity for Catholic education is to help students and their families both make sense of and meaning in the world. So given the requirement to be concise, I'm going to bring forward just maybe two particular issues which I think are very important in passing on the faith. Who is teaching in the schools and how they are prepared to teach, especially religion and theology, is a topic of common concern. But we continue to frame this topic in the phenomenon from the shift of the religious to the lay. And personally, I want to tell you that has happened. Tony Bright pointed this shift out almost 25 years ago in Catholic schools in the common good. The bishops have finally acknowledged it in their beautiful new document, Co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord, which is who we are. Who is teaching in the schools and their preparation needs to stay in the conversation. But I think the more pressing concern is the need for leadership throughout all of Catholic education. While there are many, many excellent people serving in Catholic education in a variety of roles across the country, there is a shortage of well-prepared persons able and willing to accept leadership positions. At the present time, 2 large dioceses are without a superintendent. For 2 years running, you might know one of those dioceses, and another large diocese will begin a search. Generous and good-hearted but unprepared persons accept school principalships. That happens more often in parish elementary schools than in secondary schools. Hiring persons with only public school experience, which happens more at the secondary level and in diocesan offices, can weaken the Catholic identity of the enterprise. Hiring unprepared persons sends a covert message which promotes a culture of mediocrity, as in anyone will do. It adds to the worry about the erosion of Catholic identity and can undermine the fullness of Catholic education. The way we conceptualize leadership will influence the success of the school. Recipe knowledge is simply not enough. It is limiting. Those of you who are in school leadership positions know you cannot be prepared for every contingency that walks through the schoolhouse door. Catholic educational leaders need to build on solid degree work offered in Catholic colleges and universities across the nation. In other words, good, solid degree work is required. But further, Catholic school leaders need to think broadly, to ask deeper questions, and they need to act out of careful and thoughtful understanding of educational purpose and a firm conviction that this work is part of building the kingdom of God. Leaders need a depth of spirituality to guide the institution to be thoroughly sacred and graced. At the present time, there are nearly 30 Catholic colleges and universities which offer degrees and certificate programs for Catholic educational leaders. Boston College, of course, being a leader in that effort. In the scheme of things, even though this has been going on for about 15 years, colleges and dioceses working together, colleges adopting troubled schools, is a promising new movement in Catholic higher education. The alliance which exists between colleges and universities which offer this kind of degree work is a treasure, and it's a gift to all of our educational ministries. We need more promotion, research, and writing about this development, and certainly this effort is worth support from college leadership and college boards of trustees. The other critical issue to which we must pay heed is the possibility that Catholic education is unconsciously becoming more like the secular government-controlled schools, public schools. While Catholic schools are entitled to certain services from the federal government of which they should avail themselves, there is a new move afoot to consider becoming charter schools in order to solve the affordability issue. Charter schools are publicly funded, so they're not free. They're secular schools, which were originally designed to give public schools legitimate ways to experiment beyond the normal regulations. Charter schools are under the control of individual states and districts, not the federal government, so regulations vary across the country. Several denominations have found ways to establish charter schools. I visited most recently with some people from the Assembly of God Church in Texas, and they have religious charter schools, which was a mystery to me. Here's how it works. The school is a school. Then students are removed from the school and they go over to the church building for their Bible study. It sounds like some of us who are a little older would remember was called release time, and it didn't work very well. But that's what they're doing. No religion is taught in the school building. Now that's exactly opposite of our description of a Catholic school. But this has already spawned a text called Religious Charter Schools, which explores the possibility of schools legally accommodating religious beliefs, but never endorsing them. I believe that if Catholic schools consider establishing themselves as charter schools, minimizes the importance of our faith. Some Catholic schools also often rush to embrace the same state standards, the same state testing, the same national testing, the same state textbooks, often unwittingly endorsing then the public school agenda. If we focus solely on testing, and we do so to establish we're as good as the best public schools, or we are better, that feeds into that competitive market culture. Even though the so-called spreadsheet parents want this kind of information in choosing a school, Joe and Gerald rightfully point out this attitude is a threat to the mission integrity of Catholic education. And why do I bring this up? I think the current discussion around charter schools could give people in Catholic education the opportunity to redefine quite clearly what is meant by a Catholic school. The present and most frequent questions revolve around who's teaching the Catholic faith and what do they know about it? Are there crucifixes in the classroom? And why aren't more people going to Mass? I propose those are not quite the right questions. We should always ask who is teaching the content of the faith, and are they prepared to teach that much? But the deeper question is, who is paying attention to the culture of the school, its integrity to mission? The Catholic school is the agency of sacred culture, when the dignity of each human person is taught and practiced in the classroom, on the playing field, in service projects, and in club activities. The Catholic school has the opportunity to be countercultural when Catholic social teachings are taught and they guide teaching and they guide programs. When academic programs are stellar and budget allocations reflect our priorities. The retreat budget compared to the athletic budget, okay? The Catholic school must be the place where we speak of Jesus, where we pray and have liturgical celebrations, and learn the counterculturedness of Scripture and live it. This kind of education is all of a piece, and it cannot be separated into discrete parts. There is a lot of work to be done, but the good news for me is this is happening in so many places. It is vibrant in many schools. I am privileged to visit schools where this happens every day. But a wide awakeness is required so that the mission of Catholic education is not mere talk, but it is the authenticity of the mission is realized. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I did learn something new that I didn't mention in Susan's vita this afternoon, and that is that in addition to her many contributions to Catholic schools in urban areas, one of them is in the arts, and she contributes to a program where ballroom instruction is taught in several schools. So we'll ask her to waltz up to the podium, if you'd like.
Thank you all. This is so humbling for me. I feel like I was just where you are. So for me to be on this side of the podium is very, very special. I did fly up from Philadelphia today, and this was not a good week to be in Philadelphia. In the space of 3 days, a police officer was shot point blank in the head, a 25-year veteran who just celebrated his 25-year anniversary just because he walked into a Dunkin' Donuts at the wrong time. A Temple student was brutally raped and beaten in a classroom between 6 and 7 at night. A physically handicapped girl was killed in her house after her father left for work. These are everyday occurrences. Yet I do want to stress that in light of these everyday occurrences and these horrors, I see miracles happen every week in 4 different schools in the same area of Philadelphia. How do you describe a school that's not affiliated with the church, where the president is a Presbyterian woman, the principal is an Immaculate Heart of Mary nun, 90% of the students are not Catholic, yet they're taught Catholic religion every day in religion class, and one of the biggest donors is a very successful Jewish man? Oh, and the disciplinarian is an amazing man who just celebrated his 50th year as a Jesuit. I call it Catholic with an uppercase C and Catholic with a lowercase c. Welcome to Jesus School. Jesus School is located in North Philadelphia next to a big, beautiful, however closed, Church of the Jesu. The church was modeled after a beautiful church in Rome, but it closed 15 years ago due to lack of Catholics in the neighborhood. However, the parents begged to keep this school open when they wanted to close the school also. A Philadelphia businessman heard their plea, and he challenged other businessmen and other men and women in the area with a monetary challenge. 15 years later, the financial word was heard, and there is a president, a chairman of the board, trustees, and the beginning of an independent Catholic school. as Oprah would say, a new kind of normal. There are now 450 students grades pre-K through 8, no admissions test, no selective admissions. Only 10% of these students are Catholic, but their commitment is to helping that 2-mile radius in North Philadelphia. Their motto is Jesu Works, and they show this time and time again. Between 90 and 95% of the Jesu graduates complete high school, compared to less than 50% who live in the neighborhood who do not go to Jesu. This past year, 49% of the Jesu students improved between 4th grade and 8th grade on their standardized tests. When I asked the 8th grade religion teacher, Laura Weatherly, an amazing woman, what were the challenges in passing on the faith to her students, she said, the outside world. Laura teaches religion not only by using the Bible, but also by using the newspaper. She has her class analyze once a week newspaper articles and talk about choices, spirituality, missions, what could have been done, what should have been done. Laura also, and Gerald, this is almost what you said, Laura also brings in real life people for the students to meet. A couple who was happily married for 40 years, and talking about the commitment of marriage, or a young mother and father talking about the commitments of parenthood. I asked a Jesu parent why her daughter was at Jesu, why she chose this. And she said, they give me the structure, they give me the challenge, they give my daughter a way out of North Philadelphia. She said, if you go to public school, you skip a week, nobody knows. If you go to Jesu, you miss a day, you get a phone call. In a world where there's so many negatives, Jesu schools started their examination of conscience program for the students, talking about when you live in the poverty level, but yet they stress what you have to be thankful for. They also have a community, as their classrooms are called. And when you enter the community, you're greeted by an ambassador. And the ambassador welcomes you not only to the school, but to that classroom. Their philosophy is not do what you can. The philosophy I see is you will succeed. Sister Ellen said that she's the principal at Jesu, and she said her favorite scenario is children that come there pre-K and stay through 8th grade. St. Malachy's is another little gem in North Philadelphia, right next to St. Malachy's Church. Hearing gunshots is a very frightening but common occurrence from the school. There's 210 students, grades K through 8, with 40% of their family with an income, earning an income of $15,000 or less. 3% of the students are Catholic. But the principal, Ruth Thornton Payne, is committed to making these children succeed with a Catholic education, as she was once a St. Malachy's student. Sister Jean McGowan, who is a sister of St. Joseph, is the principal at LaSalle Academy. This is an independent Catholic school following the Nativity San Miguel model, and it's located at a former convent in North Philadelphia where Sister Jean used to live. This school is only grades 3 through 8 and only 90 students, and 80% of them are Catholic. But the average family income for 4 is $14,000 and below. The LaSalle Academy, their commitment is to teaching the poorest of the poor all over the city. Sister Jean told me that she tells the students, she says, I say to my students, I can't do anything about the cards you were dealt, but I can help you play with the hand you have. Through small teacher-pupil ratios, an 11th month school year, as well as a longer day, her students averaged a 20-point increase on their standardized tests in the areas of reading, language, and math. St. Martin de Porres, this is like describing your children. Whichever one I'm in is the one I love the best. St. Martin de Porres is also located in North Philadelphia, and that's a traditional Catholic school. If you can call 410 students in attendance and only 41 of them are Catholic, traditional. Both Jesu and St. Martin de Porres are part of the Beacon program, an after-school program which is sponsored by Cardinal Regali and the Philadelphia Archdiocese. Now, how did they qualify? Because they had zip codes that meet certain criteria. These criteria are number of child abuse cases, number of neglect cases, major crime arrests for drug offenses, juvenile homicide victims, and gunshot victims. The ultimate good news, bad news. At St. Martin de Porres, Stan Faison stresses the need for the connection between spirituality and discipline. He said that he would like to remind youth that before they act or make a decision, quote, everything should begin with a conversation with God through prayer. In this world of email, text messaging, faxing, teleconferencing, moto mail, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just concentrate on starting everything with a conversation with God? Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to stay up here. I'd like to invite our presenters. We have a few minutes for a couple of maybe one or two questions or comments. So we'll invite them to come up to the podium. I also want to recognize with us this afternoon is one of the contributors to the handbook from Peru. Father Jeff Klaber is here with us, and he's a visiting scholar at the Jesuit Institute at Boston College during this academic year, so I want to recognize him and thank him for his presence in both the volume and personally with us. We had broad themes this afternoon, and I'd like to know if, give an opportunity for any comments or reflections or that any of you might have to our presentation. Jerry?
I'd address this to anyone on the panel. Where you have Catholic schools serving the poor, but their school populations are from mixed religious backgrounds, is there, I'm hearing that, okay, we teach Catholicism to all of those children, irrespective of their religious communities. Is there an effort, or do you think schools should make the effort in those situations to have perhaps a more ecumenical approach to teaching religion?
Well, I think, one of the things that comes across, especially in places like India, for example, where a number of the principles about human dignity and kind of a Catholic perspective are certainly taught, but also I think part of that is a respect for the culture and the religion of the family from which the child comes. That it's not an indoctrination, and it's not a devaluing of the uniqueness of that child's perspective.
I would totally agree with that. I think it's that tricky situation that you get into many things. I've been in situations where you have many children whose families are in the military, but you don't particularly believe in violence. So it's respecting the student. I think there are ways to have prayer services that are a little more ecumenical. But the thing that guides me are two things. One is I visited schools much like Susan described in Washington, D.C., where the students are 80% non-Catholic. And who wants the kids taught? Their parents. And I've met these parents. They say, we want our children to have religion. We want them to be taught. Catholic is fine with us. I go to the Baptist church on Sunday, but we want Catholic religion taught. And the other thing that always motivates me is seeing Archbishop Wilton Gregory's face, who said to me one day, look at this face. Look at this face. Don't forget this face. I was once one of those little children in that school. He wasn't Catholic. So he always says, teach the faith.
Yes.
I have a question related to this idea about Catholic schools being first and foremost for the poor. Reminds me of a lecture which Father John O'Malley gave here several months ago. He talked about the early Jesuit schools, and he said that St. Ignatius, this is back in the Protestant Reformation time. When St. Ignatius was starting the schools and colleges, he had a list of 10 standards which he insisted upon. And at the top of that list, according to Father O'Malley, was that no student would be charged any tuition because he wanted to make sure that the poor could get the education along with the rich. And if the school wasn't endowed properly, he wouldn't start the school. He wanted to try and make sure that the poor had a chance. Now, to bring it a little bit closer, in 1964, Mary Perkins Ryan wrote the book here in the United States. A lot of little Europe may have heard of it. Our parochial schools, the answer. In which she suggested that we were at a state then, she didn't mention the poor directly, but we were at a state in Catholic education back then where so much of our resources and talent and time were spent on relatively few students, mainly those in Catholic schools, where the vast majority going outside of Catholic schools were not getting too much. And she suggested even closing, starting to think about closing Catholic schools in order to shift those resources towards a larger group that weren't getting much confraternity and Christian doctrine and other after-school programs. Now, given the situation today, where it's getting to be almost scandalous from the point of view of the poor not having much of a chance, although there are exceptions. I admit there are cases where the poor are, we're trying, but it's becoming so difficult. Aren't we at a point where we should consider her suggestion of shifting the resources that we're now spending on Catholic schools to a school that is open to the poor, given a preferential option to the poor?
Well, I would say no. We should hold fast to what has been declared to be our first and foremost commitment to the education of the poor. And the crucial issue there, as you rightly are indicating, is, but how do you resource this project? Now, coming from England, of course, I can tell you that we are able certainly to resource that project because the British government picks up the whole of the cost of the running of any faith-based school, Catholic, Seventh-day Adventist, Buddhist, Islamic. They are all given 100% running costs from the British state, and a faith community simply has to come up with 10% of the capital cost of a school, and then it's in business. So our Catholic schools are very much in the service of the poor, but they're in the service of the poor because the state is providing the finance to make this possible. And as I've argued in other places, if we take the USA as an example, your first and foremost mission to the poor was underwritten by the resources of the religious communities, their economic resource, their faith resource, their personnel resource. It was a massive subsidy provided by those congregations to make, first and foremost, a mission to the poor. But the crisis here, as I see it, is that those congregations are not able to sustain that subsidy. And your government, by reason of your historic constitution, will not move in to fill the vacuum that is there. And quite frankly, I say this as an outsider, of course, but it seems to me outrageous that this situation goes on, because the research is there to show that Catholic schools make a massive contribution to the good of American society. And the state, I mean, why does the British state underwrite its faith-based schooling and is actually expanding them at the moment? The Church of England is going to increase its secondary schools by 100. The Jewish community is increasing its schooling, and the Islamics are increasing their schooling, and the British government is perfectly happy to accept this and to fund it all, because they know that investment in students in faith-based schooling will bring great benefit to the society and the society should pay for it. And that is my answer.
We have one more question.
This dilemma, this school was built by the Irish of South Boston, and they can't get in because of cost. But let me give a proposal here. It's too bad you can't have like a peace corps of those who graduate. Many Catholic kids would like to go see these local schools for 1 or 2 years. You have the problem of the heavy debt. And they want to go out and clean up these debts. I have a girl who graduated from Cleveland State, and she worked and been in her own and she borrowed, but she has to pay back $42,000, which is $300 a month, like on a market with writing skill and all of that. And the school was supposed to help her get a good job, and she's not getting a good paying job. But there's that dilemma. But if you could have like a peace corps, a lot of these kids would love to do it. Is there a way you can begin with that? And another possibility is in the 3rd year of the School of Ed, instead of going directly to the 4th year, the student will go out and teach in North Carolina or wherever and teach in local schools. And then, depending upon recommendations and so on, you get certification and so on. Then, maybe because of how well it went, there could be a partial forgiveness of the loan incurred upon
Let me just respond. I think one of the areas that Karen referred to, which is kind of a new moment for Catholic colleges and universities being engaged. Another piece of evidence of that has been the growth of precisely what you're talking about, our teacher corps programs. So we have an urban Catholic teacher corps here in Boston, and there are now, Karen, how many, 14 around the country maybe?
I think 13 or 14.
13 or 14 programs, precisely what you're talking about, where graduates of a Catholic college or university, or sometimes even non-Catholic college or university, who will work, it's a living example right there, who will work in the schools, live in community, etc. So certainly the teacher corps program, kind of the Peace Corps thing you're talking about, exists. And much of what I think we need to do now is to expand that and to find the kind of resources that it takes to expand that initiative. The second thing, I know it's something that we've talked about here at BC, is trying to raise funds to provide loan forgiveness for any of our undergraduates who go into human service professions, certainly who would go into Catholic schools, but who would go into public school teaching, or would go into social work, or would go into those kinds of professions. It's a real conundrum for Catholic higher education, given the financial realities of private higher education in the United States. How do we create possibilities where our students aren't so burdened by debt that they're unable to enter the kinds of professions where they can build up the common good? So certainly I think the suggestion that you've raised does exist, and we need to enhance it and strengthen it, and then we need to expand it to create the kind of loan forgiveness programs. We certainly do it on the graduate level here. We have a number of master's programs where the funding is a forgiven loan if students work for a certain number of years, 2 or 3 years, in a high poverty school. So kind of gearing our financial aid to get our best students to the kind of schools they should be in. Karen?
No, he wants to say something else.
Yep.
add on in the same area if the rich, the philanthropy, the benefactor group, if you could mind the contribution to this group system and then deviate it.
Yeah.
And it's really a prejudice of a society, the fights that go about this and all of that. But if you can make it known to them, I think
it needs to be better promoted.
Right.
You know, we're always so humble. You know, this idea needs promotion big time, broadly, because it's doing exactly what you say, and it's doing wonderfully well, and people love it. And the other thing I can tell you is there's an abundance of wonderful young people that want to do this. They're wonderful young people.
Well, I'm personally indebted to the contributions that these panelists have made to the scholarship and the thinking and personal sacrifice for Catholic education, and hope that the time you spent this afternoon was worth your while as well. And I want to thank each of you for making that time contribution, and know that many of you are personally invested or in the field of education and particularly interested in Catholic education. So I want to thank you for being part of that community. We have an opportunity to have some fellowship for a few minutes and refreshments off to the side, but I want to allow us to be once more publicly grateful to our panel for their contribution this afternoon.